And God called Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham responded, "Here I am." We hear today from the book of Genesis the story of the binding of Isaac, a story that I suspect at turns mystifies and horrifies 21st century hearers. Millennia and cultures removed from its context, we might get hung up on human, child, or animal sacrifice, or hasten too quickly to later and maybe problematic Christian interpretations of the text. But the binding of Abraham's beloved son, claimed by Jews and Christians to be Isaac, and by later Muslim sources to be Ishmael, plays a prominent role in the Jewish liturgy and has been interpreted extensively and in multivalent ways across the centuries. So today, I want to try to meet our modern and even legitimate objections and mine the text with some insights from the Breshit Rabbah, a collection of rabbinic interpretations on the book of Genesis, which spans about 8 centuries. So first, I think when we imagine Isaac today, we picture a kid, somebody young enough to be trailing a teddy bear, somebody who is coerced or tricked, in which case every cleric and social worker and teacher in the room is weighing their mandate to report to Child Protective Services. Am I right? But the rabbis cast Isaac as what we would consider an adult, 30, give or take, joining willingly, if somberly, in his father's act of faithfulness. Because faithfulness is not something we can accomplish alone. Even in our English translation, you can hear the refrain, "And the two walked on together." They walked on together. And the rabbis continue, one to bind and the other to be bound, one to slaughter and the other to be slaughtered. Second, when we imagine this scene, I think we see mountain wilderness, Mount Tam, or the trees and trails that could lead to father-son bonding or junior rangers camping adventure. But the rabbinic eye might also see signs of the Holy of Holies and of the Sabbath, where Abraham, despite having servants, prepares the donkey for himself, leaves his servants, presumably Gentiles, to rest while he presses on to perform religious duties. And to perform these duties, Abraham and Isaac have to go up, not just to any mountain, but to Mount Moriah, which will appear again later in the scriptures in the second book of Chronicles. And there it's in Jerusalem, where King Solomon lays the foundation of the temple. And so these themes taken together lead some to conclude that gifts are given only as a reward for worshiping. Abraham returned in peace as a reward for worshiping, says this rabbinic source. The temple was built as a reward for worshiping. And then they go on to quote Psalm 95, "Still come, let us bow down and bend the knee and worship the Lord, our Maker." So the question for me that is evoked by our readings on the whole today is, what is the nature of faithful worship? The kind which is both costly and richly rewarded. And I want to offer that the text suggests 3 dimensions of that worship. First, worship is inherently corporate. We can't avoid one another. We can't retreat into some kind of personal spirituality without a corporate anchor and still worship this God faithfully. Rather, we are bound together. We each have a role, we have work to do, and we do that work on behalf of the one who sends us. Abraham and Isaac act on behalf of God and on behalf of God's messengers. And the same is true of Jesus' disciples. In these brief lines that we hear from the Gospel according to Matthew today, they conclude a portion of the scripture called the missionary discourse, the sending of these disciples. And in the sending, it is so clear that they are not mere envoys, but they are empowered. They are empowered to act on behalf of Jesus. They become the presence of Christ for those whom they meet. And so worship is corporate. Secondly, worship is sacrificial. In worship, God asks something of us, of our time, our presence, our material resources, but also our imagination, our heart, our gifts, our loves. God calls to Abraham, and Abraham says, "Here I am." And he's not presenting GPS coordinates. He's making a self-offering. Here I am, all of me, offered. The sacrifice is born not of counting the cost, but in plumbing the innumerable depths of love that God will provide. Like the love that sits at a bedside, the love that prepares a festal meal, the love that gives away a prized possession. Sacrifice in worship springs from love of God who loves us first and loves us completely. Which brings us to a third dimension of worship. It is symbolic, or it's symbol-rich. Our gospel today extols, "Whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones." And again, we might think little child, but interpreters tend to believe that this is a reference to the community of disciples, or to treating a stranger as though they were at the center of the community of disciples. They're not asked to interview the intended recipient, to know anything apart from their shared humanity. They're not asked to give everything that recipient might need, but just to give attentively, lovingly, and symbolically. To give in ways that nurture and refresh, small ways, even a cup of cold water. Week by week, we come and gather around this table to offer our own sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving, to share in small ways, in remembrance of the one who is both priest and sacrifice, once in time given for all time. But we are not here as observers, nor primarily as recipients. We are here as participants. Deliver us, O Lord, from the presumption of coming to this table for solace only and not for strength, our Eucharistic prayer will say. And to which I add, deliver us from the presumption of coming to the table to take and eat and feast, and not also to bring some part of ourselves to the altar to be offered up. So I invite us to come today, to come and worship, bringing something that is at once symbolic and costly, affirming that we too are members of the body of one who is sacrificed and sanctified, that we too are bound in love, that we too are broken, scattered, and poured out. I conclude today with a liturgical poem that was written by a 12th century Bavarian rabbi. It was written in Ladino, which is an amalgam of Old Spanish and Hebrew, spoken predominantly by Sephardic Jews. And I'm going to offer it in both the Ladino because you'll hear the cadence of the poem, as well as in the English translation. Corrió a el mozo por santificarlo, y su alma atada con su alma, le encoronó con leños y su fuego, corona de su Dios sobre su cabeza. He hurried to the child to hallow him, even though his soul was attached to him. He surrounded him with wood and fire, like a crown of God upon his head. Like the prophet's reward, like the crown upon the head, the gift given even though the soul is attached, the peace that passes understanding, the sanctuary to which we are gathered, the bread broken and scattered. God will call, and God will also provide. Like Abraham, let us hasten to say, "Here I am."